Hi, my name is Nate Lucas, and I'm your host for the Kentucky Kernel Podcast, the University of Kentucky's very own award-winning newspaper. Today marks our first episode into this podcasting endeavor, and what better to kick off with than our Pigskin Preview, where I'll be previewing the Kentucky Wildcats football team alongside our amazing sports editors. So, I'll hand off to that. Hi, guys, and thank you all for taking the time to come on. And if you don't mind, could you quickly introduce yourselves with your name and position at the Kentucky Kernel?
My name is Cole Park, and I'm the sports editor of the Kentucky Kernel.
I am Samantha Money. I am one of the assistant sports editors at the Kentucky Kernel.
My name is Ali Chetanok. I am the other assistant sports editor of the Kentucky Kernel.
All right, so my first question is directed for you, Cole. It feels like there's a different type of hype for Kentucky football this year. What would you attribute that to?
I mean, I'd attribute it to a couple things, but I feel like nothing's more prominent than Liam Cohen coming back to lead the offense. I mean, people saw what he did 2 years ago with Will Levis that helped lead Kentucky to its second Citrus Bowl in 4 years. My apologies. Obviously, with him gone, there's a lot of hype last year, but we saw with Rich Scangrello that train went off the rails a little bit last year. It was quite the disappointment, and a lot of people attributed that to the offense. So you've got Liam Cohen coming back to lead that offense after a year with the Los Angeles Rams. You've got a transfer quarterback who remind a lot of people of Will Levis, if not even better. You've got running back in Ray Davis coming in from Vanderbilt, who torched the Wildcats last year here at Kroger Field. You've got more running backs coming from NC State, all over the place, really. And, you know, you've just got a rejuvenated offense. There's a lot of faith in Brad White to lead the defense. There's not a ton of questions surrounding that. And so you imagine you have a sturdy defense plus what people are expecting to be a phenomenal offense. And a lot of people are thinking this year could be what last year was supposed to be. And then you top that off with undeniably one of the biggest spectacles of the season, Alabama coming to Lexington, plus Kentucky always plays Georgia. So, you know, there's a feeling out there that if anything's going to happen, this year would be one of the best years to do it.
Yeah, of course. And if you want to talk a little bit more about Liam Cohen, how does this guy who was an NFL offensive coordinator, find himself back at Kentucky?
Well, he went up to L.A. after coming to Kentucky, after coming from L.A. in the first place. So he's kind of gone back and forth. But there's a lot of speculation. I mean, the Rams had an unfortunate season last year with Sean McVay at the helm, and even though he's still a little bit older now, he's still the wonder kid coach over there. So I think there was a lot of difficulties with Cohen and creative control. He felt like he didn't have final say on a lot of things. And one thing that, Stoops is going to take the reins if he needs to, but Stoops also likes to give his coordinators, the ability to do what they do. I mean, he hired him for a reason, right? So I think Cohen really liked the freedom he had at Kentucky and the success he found at Kentucky. And things just weren't necessarily going as well at the Rams, and obviously it's a higher position. There's a lot more scrutiny on you, and a team like the Rams that was in the Super Bowl so recently, when they're struggling, there's fingers being pointed around, and unfortunately one of those things that struggled was the offense. And I mean, we can see that with Rich Scangrello last year. I mean, being an offensive coordinator in the NFL versus college football is a very different beast. I mean, just because you're good at one does not mean you're going to be good at the other. And, I think he was more comfortable here. His family liked it here, and he felt that he was going to be able to succeed better here.
All right, and Sam or Ali, do you all agree with that take that the influx of transfers has kind of rejuvenated the program, Liam Cohen coming back? What do you all think?
I agree a lot. I think there's a lot of transfers to be excited about. I mean, obviously, Devin Leary is going to be the guy that everyone's looking forward to. I think Leary's skill set is going to fit Cohen's game plan more so than I even think Will Levis, to be honest, because also not just Will Levis really only had one option to throw the ball to. I think Leary's going to have a lot of talented not freshmen, but last year were freshmen and this year sophomores. So I think a lot of what he said, I think some other transfers like Ray Davis, I mean, you lose to Vanderbilt and then get the guy who rushed over 100 yards on you. So I think that's a great addition also.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very obvious that the offensive line wasn't the best it could have been last year with, I think it was 47 sacks they allowed for Will Levis. So, I mean, you have to look at Marquez Cox coming in, and, I mean, fans are really excited just for something different to be there now. And hopefully, I mean, there's no way it can be near as bad as it was this past year. So that'll be something great to add to this year's team as well.
I'd also like to add that it's not just transfers that bring the excitement, too. I mean, Leary, Ali kind of touched on it a little bit about how Will Levis didn't have as many options, but didn't have as many really, just didn't have a system that was really tailored to him as well as Liam Cohen's was. And if you're under the assumption that I think some of us are, that, you know, Leary could be even better than Levis was, you've got a guy coming in here with, he's got impressive running backs that he can rely on. He could run if he needed to. And he's got great options. I mean, Smoney over there, she wrote a beautiful feature on Dane Key and Barryon Brown, who were true freshman wide receivers last year, who both made an immense impact on the roster as true freshmen. So you've got these guys come back for a second year, stronger, more experienced, better in the system, and a guy who showed when he was here 2 years ago, he's not afraid to throw a deep ball. He's not afraid to let the quarterback do what he wants to do and make those spectacular passes.
Yeah, and after talking to Dane and Barry on this past week, I mean, you can tell their excitement for Leary. He has great accuracy that they've both mentioned that surprised them both just how awesome he's been, and he's being a great leader so far during practice over summer, during camp. He's really getting to know everyone, being a good leader, and they're just really excited to have him, and it's great to see that.
I would agree what you just said, too, especially about him off the field. I think Levis, everybody loved him on the field, but off the field, to be honest, I didn't see him much around in Lexington. But Leary, all the guys say they love him, and that's all I've been hearing out of campus, how good Leary is as a teammate, and I think we kind of missed that with Levis at certain times.
I mean, Levis was just under so much stress and pressure last year with that O-line and just lots of things going wrong, not living up to fan expectations for the season. So you got to feel for him in a way. But, I mean, I think it is kind of like it's definitely a fresh start this year for everyone, for fans, for the team, for coaches. And that's really excited. Look forward to.
I think it's also palpable that, you know, the players themselves are excited. Mm-hmm. And how can you not feel excited as a fan or a journalist or someone who follows the team when the players themselves are this excited? I mean, in Smoney's feature here, you know, you hear Dane and Barryon both say how ready they are to succeed, how ready they are to do even better than they did last year. And when you got guys saying that, I mean, you know, guys are going to say good things every season, but it just feels like a genuine excitement going into this year. And when the players are that excited, the players are that locked in, you can't help but feel like something great could happen. I mean, we've touched so much on the offense, but, you know, while I don't have as much in-depth to go into on the defense, you know when Brad White is at the helm, it's going to be good. You know, certainly that there were games last year that Kentucky struggled. For the Tennessee one comes to mind where Kentucky was just torched by the Vols. But you also look at when they played Georgia, the eventual national champions, and they held them below 20. I mean, that's Brad White's wheelhouse right there. And, you know, even if it's not always flashy, even if it's not always the thing that steals the headlines, you know he's going to get that job done. And the offense can do those flashy things.
And I actually think this defense is going to be better than last year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that excitement is super palpable. You know, the season tickets sold out, which is that a first for Kroger Field?
It does sell out eventually. Mm-hmm. I know, I'm pretty sure last year, don't quote me on this, but there was still some available after that student lottery ended. But this year, I believe that the student lottery, all the season tickets were taken, got sold. So pretty awesome for them.
Yeah, and we'll see if that excitement translates. And that kind of leads me into my next question. Ollie, this is for you. What do you think the hardest matchup that Kentucky has that they have a chance of actually coming out on top over that team?
Well, I actually think they have a chance in every single game they play. But obviously the one that sticks out is going to be Georgia, I think. But again, you talk about matchups. Kentucky matches up well against Georgia a lot of the time. I think we give Georgia the hardest game of every year we play against them, to be honest. But just looking at Alabama, I don't know. Again, it's Alabama, but we don't know who's going to be quarterback. But I think Alabama is going to be a tough game to win, obviously. But also with Tennessee, there's a lot of question about Tennessee. Was last year the system or was it the players? I think this year we're going to find out. So I think Georgia, that's a for sure loss to me. I think Alabama, again, I have an L here for them, but I think they're going to be a lot closer in the game compared to maybe people think will be. But I think Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama are the hardest games. But I think they have a chance in every single game they play.
Yeah, for sure. What do you all think?
Yeah, so I would honestly agree with the first sentiment, especially too, that the beauty of sport is that theoretically any team can win any game.
Yeah.
So every single game, I'm not going to say there's no chance whatsoever. I predicted the Cats to have 3 losses this year: Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia. The one I see them having the least chance in is Georgia. I mean, I think it'll be close. I think Brad White will do his thing. But I think it'll be the exact same as it always is. It'll be a great game that Kentucky just does not win. I think that Tennessee is underrated as a difficult matchup, in my opinion. But I'll kind of agree with Ali a little bit. I think the one that I didn't have them winning, that they have the best chance of maybe pulling off an upset, is Alabama, as crazy as that sounds. I mean, you look at what that's going to be. You look at the hype surrounding that, and it gives me shades of Tennessee last year. Certainly Tennessee and Alabama is a bit bigger rivalry than Kentucky-Alabama because there's not really a Kentucky-Alabama rivalry. But
Yeah,
what I
only
mean
beat
is-
them twice.
Yeah, but what I mean is when Alabama went into Tennessee last year, that place was rocking. It was full, packed house. I mean, when Tennessee pulled off that upset, the fans pulled down the goalpost and threw it in a river outside the stadium. It was just an atmosphere. And this is something that, since the schedule was announced, Kentucky fans have been clamoring for this matchup. I mean, people are, putting down deposits ready that I don't care what happens that week, I'm going to Alabama, Kentucky. So you're going to have Kroger Field just absolutely packed. I think you've got Brad White, who's going to do his thing defensively. I think you've got a great offense who, if everything goes according to plan, can be just really, really incredible, something great. And kind of like Ali touched on a little bit, I mean, it's Alabama. It's Nick Saban. I'm sure they'll figure it out. But Alabama is a team that's coming into this year with some uncertainty. You know, there's some questions surrounding the team. And we're looking at a team that didn't make the playoffs last year. They were in a bowl game. And that's not super common for this era of Alabama, which is a testament to how good Nick Saban has been. But, I'm not going to be one to say the dynasty's over by any means, not even close. But I think that Kentucky-Alabama is one that I could see Kentucky pulling off a magical upset, and then the fans just absolutely storming that field after.
See, I gotta disagree with both Cole and Ali here because we have a little rivalry going on ourselves. So we both predicted Kentucky to go 9-3 on the season. They both had losses to Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee. But I think, to answer your question, Nate, out of all of those really hard matchups, I think Tennessee is the one they have the best chance of pulling off the upset because they got absolutely annihilated by Tennessee last year, and it was embarrassing, and they were upset, fans were upset, 44-6. But this year, it's at Kroger. It's in Lexington, and the team is going to be mad, fans are going to be mad. We know that Kroger Field can pull off the occasional crazy stadium.
Aren't they mad every year, though?
Yeah, they still lost at Kroger 2 years ago.
Yeah, well, we're just not thinking
Scored on
about
first
that.
play of the game.
We're just no. We're just gonna think of last year, and we're really just gonna take last year, and use that. They're gonna use that to their advantage this year. But I that's where I think that I think Kentucky's gonna have an upset this year. I really do think it's gonna be Tennessee because there's got to be a game where Kentucky also gets upset by another team this season. So my prediction was they win that Tennessee game, but they get beat by South Carolina at South Carolina. So that's where I differed with them.
Yeah, I think the South Carolina is warranted because, I mean, they are going to have Darude there, the creator of Sandstorm, and I think that's going to be a really hyped game for them. They're kind of trying
Hype
to
every game.
They're kind of trying to create a rivalry between Kentucky and South Carolina. It feels like.
I don't buy into Beamer train at all. I don't think Spencer Rattler's a good quarterback at all. I think South Carolina beat us last year because we had
a backup QB.
A bad backup QB. But going off what she says, I kind of agree with this. Again, we're not going to know what Tennessee is until we see them play. Was last year the players or was it the system? I'm under the impression that was a little bit more the players than it was the system, but we're going to find out. But also, I just want to say, watch out for this Louisville game because I think this Louisville game is going to be a lot closer than people think.
I could agree with that a little bit, too. I could agree with several things that were just said. One with Ali about South Carolina. I mean, I even mentioned it, too, in my predictions that we put out before the season that South Carolina is dubbed one of the hardest places to play in college football. That doesn't stop Kentucky from winning 3 of 4 at South Carolina. And I'm sure it'll be disgusting. It'll be ugly. I predicted 19-12, which is a gross scoreline. But Kentucky just doesn't seem to lose in Columbia that often, even despite it being that difficult. But jumping on to what Ali just said, I do think that there is something to be said about the Louisville game.
Yeah.
I think Kentucky still wins, but I think it's important that Kentucky has just dominated Louisville the way it has recently, that people have kind of stopped looking at Louisville the way they used to.
They won't dominate them this year.
No, I don't think they will.
It's still a hard game.
Yeah, people have kind of started looking over Louisville because of the last few years, and that's been a program that's had some really unfortunate circumstances behind the scenes, off the field, that have kind of limited it. But, they've got a new coach coming in from, was it Purdue? They hired their coach
Purdue,
from?
yeah, but he's a Louisville guy.
He's a Louisville guy, yeah. And
Brom, right? Jeff Brom?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he could totally have his chops by the end of the season, and we could definitely see an upset there. You're right.
I think they're going to be motivated for that game. I think Brom, he knows how important that is for establishing a culture at Louisville, and also you can be the same for Florida too. You don't know how Napier's going to have his team for his biggest game of his career is having Kentucky at home to start their SEC season. So watch out for Florida.
So Kentucky, Louisville this year. So if they beat them, that's going to be 5 in a row, correct? It'll be year 5.
Yes.
And they haven't done that before. I don't believe so. So I think that's going to be another thing that's just really intriguing to watch. Is this new coach going to let them do that, or is he going to be like, no, we're keeping it at 4. We're not letting you beat us anymore. So I don't really think he's going to do it, but I think he'll have the good motivation to, like Ali said, I think it's definitely going to be closer than we've seen.
Well, I think another point that needs to be made too is when you make predictions, you predict the teams as they are, right? You never predict for. Nobody predicted Kentucky to lose to South Carolina last year because nobody knew Will Levis was going to be hurt for that game.
Of course, yeah.
But, going into that, it wasn't shocking they lost that game. They had Kaya Sharon starting. Kaya Sharon's not an SEC starter by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think he ever will be. And that's okay. Most people are not SEC starters. But by the time they get to this Louisville game, the last game of the season, look at the games they have before that. At South Carolina versus Alabama, at Mississippi State versus Tennessee. That's a tough stretch.
You still go to Mizzou, but you still got at Georgia right before that too. So
that's kind of why I think that there could be an upset on South Carolina's end over Kentucky, because they do have that stretch at the end of the season, and I really feel like it's either going to be Mississippi State or South Carolina, because I really, as much as everyone would love to see them go undefeated on the road, it's really just, I don't think it's going to happen, and it's going to be one of those 2 games coming down to the end of the season where they're tired. They're got Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee. It's going to be a rough couple of weeks for them. So I feel like there has to be one game where Mississippi State or South Carolina just gets the better of them. Not necessarily because South Carolina did beat them last year. Not thinking in that regard. Just it's a bad timing at the end of the season for them.
I'm going to disagree with the Mississippi State one. I think Mizzou might be more of a shout because Mizzou and UK, they always have close games.
They're disgusting games.
They're horrible games, and Drinkwitz is probably the worst head coach in the SEC, but that doesn't mean he won't beat us. I think on Mississippi State, I think that's the Stoops get his win in SEC West, because I think Mississippi State might be the worst team in the SEC this year.
And I want to kind of touch on that. I went back and forth in my own head over and over and over again making my predictions. I might have put more thought into it than I needed to, because I was looking at that pattern. Kentucky and Mississippi State always trade blows home and home and home. But I can't do it this year. Before, if you had asked me last year who was going to win this game, I would have said Mississippi State. But you know what's happened between then and there? Mississippi State's head coach Mike Leach unfortunately passed away.
Yeah. Because
of that happening, you had players decommitting from the program. And that sounds like, punching someone while they're down. But if you agreed to play for a coach who's not going to be there anymore, it's, as far as the player's concerned, it's not any different if he passed away or if he got fired. He's not there anymore. He was who they wanted to play for. And I think that's an absolutely terrible thing to happen. Mike Leach was at Kentucky earlier in his career, so he was a former Wildcat. So, even some Kentucky fans that are in the, the later stages, they might remember his tenure here. They might have been fans of Mike Leach when he was here. But, it's unfortunate, but the game of football itself isn't one that shows sympathy. You can have these heroic stories, but at the end of the day, 9 times out of 10, the team that's been beaten down and the team that's had tragedy is going to lose because they're at a disadvantage. And it feels almost kind of cruel to predict it, but I kind of agree with Ali. I think Mississippi State could be one of the worst SEC teams this year just because they don't, they're having to rebuild an identity that they weren't expecting to have to rebuild. It wasn't like they were bad for a while and then they have to kind of come up with their own. They were just absolutely rocked by tragedy in the offseason, and now they're scrambling.
But do they look at UK and think, we might not win a conference game this year? Is that the game we might win at home?
Maybe.
I mean,
Because
no one would have said that about Vanderbilt last year.
Vanderbilt's a whole different story. I mean, we see a guy run over 100 yards on us and make us look like a high school team, and we go ahead and pick him up in the portal. So,
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's going to be the teams that you least expect. So that's why I had to take a gamble there, and it's going to be one of the two of
Let's
them.
not forget Zion Childress and J.J. Weaver both out against Vanderbilt. So I think that's something a lot of people forget.
You want to talk about teams you least expect? Dare I say, roll Kearns. Could it happen?
Yeah, Cole. I don't know.
I've heard that way too much the past couple
I think they might lose
weeks.
by 40.
Yeah, Kentucky's season is really going to be about keeping it up between these teams that, might upset them and really establishing themselves as a second-tier SEC team. I mean, we could see an upset between those top three teams that you all expect to lose to, but it's really going to be about keeping it up between maybe a weaker SEC schedule that they have this year.
Well, this is something that, you hear from the basketball program all the time, and Calipari definitely makes a point to talk about it. Kentucky football is finding out that the more you raise your status, the better you are, the bigger the target on your back. Years ago when Kentucky was starting off, Kentucky was able to pull off all these crazy things because nobody really looked at Kentucky that way. Yeah. Even when they were doing better. I mean, even after their first Citrus Bowl, people were like, it's still Kentucky. It's a basketball school. And that's something you still hear. But Kentucky is one that, despite last year's hiccup, has been getting better. They've been progressively getting stronger and stronger. They've been beating teams who used to dominate them. They've been creating actual football rivalries that are back and forth. And the more you see that happen, the more you see teams like Mizzou or Mississippi State or even Vanderbilt who aren't just overlooking that game anymore. They're like, that's a game we want to focus on. That's a game we want to win because we know that that's not a freebie anymore.
Yeah.
So, when you talk about Kentucky, there's probably going to be one they get upset. I have to agree, not because I think that that's just a problem with Mark Stoops or a problem with anything. That's a problem with any growing football program, that while you're in that transitional phase between, where they were in 2013, where they went 2-10, versus where they were a few years ago, where they were a 10-win team.
Yeah, but when is Kentucky going to stop being a growing program? Is it going to be a disappointment if we see the same season that we saw last season, if there's a 7-5 record and then they lose a bowl game? That was very important for Mark Stoops' bowl record where he had that streak going. Is it a disappointment if we see another bowl loss,
I mean, it depends on the bowl for one, but you ask when Kentucky's going to stop being a growing program. I think it's important to note that there are over 100 FBS college football teams. There are only 2, Alabama and Georgia. You don't see that kind of sustained. I mean, Ohio State a few years ago, to an extent, they're kind of wishy-washy now, but the kind of team that isn't a growing program anymore, that's just solidified at the top no matter what, you don't see that very often. I mean, when you look at who's a growing program, I would say that list of who's a growing program, who has a potential to make some noise, maybe not make the playoffs, but who's a potential to make some noise is over 20-plus teams. I mean, you can pretty much look at just about half the Power 5 for that matter. And I don't know that Kentucky ever stops being a growing program or one that's constantly striving to reach that next level just because it's so rare to do so. I mean, there are teams who have won a national title. I mean, LSU won a national title.
Yeah, that's exactly who I was thinking about. When do they become an LSU where they can make some noise?
When do they become an LSU? Sure, but LSU won the national title in 2019 and fired their coach 2 years later and have been kind of a middle team in the SEC. And you can look at some off-the-field stuff for that. Their issues with recruiting violations and even the FBI for that matter. But, I mean, it's not uncommon for a team to reach the next level and then fall right back down to the middle of the pack. So, I mean, the point I'm making is the Alabamas and Georgias of the world that are sustained in the playoffs every single year, sustained winning national titles, always in the conversation for that. It's just not very common to see that. So I think even if Kentucky does get over that hump, make the playoffs, even, God forbid, shock the world and win a title somehow, I don't know that that's when it stops growing. I don't know that's when it stops, the road ends and kind of starts a new chapter. I think that might just be another chapter in a continuing story.
I mean, every team has their ups and downs, and I bring this up because I most recently watched that Florida documentary on Netflix with Urban Meyer and them winning the national championship, and they had their peak, and it happens with every team, and we'll see it eventually with Alabama and Georgia. I mean, could I tell you when? Probably not, but Will Kentucky make it there in the next couple of years? Maybe. Maybe they don't. Maybe it'll be 10, 15 years. You really have no clue. But I think this year is definitely they're on a good track. The expectations are good. They're not too high like they were last year. I think that's really what threw them.
I think we're looking at Kentucky football wrong because I'm looking at this schedule right now. Besides Georgia, every other team, I mean, you look here, who else is not a growing program? I think I don't think programs stop growing nowadays. I think nowadays you got to keep evolving. I don't think Georgia's going to stop evolving. I don't think Ohio State, these USCs, these Texases, get any recruit, they don't stop. So with that being said, I think out of this group of game, I mean, Florida, growing program, Vanderbilt, I mean, that's just, don't even got to go there. Drinkwitz at Mizzou, all these programs, they're all growing too. So I think we're looking at Kentucky football wrong in that aspect.
Minus Alabama and Georgia, I mean, almost every team in the SEC this year has been referred to as one person has referred to them as some sort of sleeper school. There's really a lot that can happen, a lot that can go wrong, a lot that can go well. And I think the fact that people are referring to Kentucky as a sleeper school, I mean, it really could help them because if they're not really expected to do a ton, or maybe they are, it's just a good place to be at, in my opinion, rather than last year.
I also think it's important to touch on, too. I mean, I know Kentucky fans get tired of hearing this now that every year, they're kind of still striving for that. But in 2013, Kentucky went 2-10. Kentucky was a team that was how we view Vanderbilt now before last year. Just an absolute, respectfully, joke.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that Kentucky's even going into last year was definitely too much. But the fact that people even thought there was a chance Kentucky could be a 4 seed in the playoffs is ridiculous if you think about how recently they were terrible. I mean, just this year, Kentucky stopped being one of 2 SEC schools to not have an indoor football specific practice facility. I mean, that's kind of absurd when you think about it that way, that it was just this summer after 2 Citrus Bowl wins that changed. Now it's Vanderbilt. I don't know if they're actually planning on building anything there or not, but
Kentucky's had 2 top 10 matchups in the last few years. I mean, I think, again, we're looking at Kentucky in the wrong way. I think this school is almost there, but again, it's just about getting results on the field. I mean, they're getting recruits left and right. I mean, it's not hard to get recruits over here. I think Stoops has done a great job the last few years, but again, we're a lot better off than, say, 6, 7 schools on our schedule this year coming up.
Yeah.
I definitely think Kentucky has fewer question marks than some schools do. I mean, Kentucky has a ton of question marks. That's not to say, I mean, we're always asking where Kentucky's going to reach the next level. But as far as that goes, I mean, how many teams on this schedule that we look at now have coaches who might be on the hot seat if this year's bad? If this year's bad, Mark Stoops is not at threat of getting fired.
No.
Let's be honest with ourselves. That's just not going to happen. But you look at half these teams, you can look at Drinkwitz at Mizzou, you can look at all these other guys. I mean, these are guys who you're not even sure they're going to be the coach in 5 years. These are teams that their questions aren't just like are we going to be good? Could this be the season? It's are we going to have to completely erase the whole board, start over again? And Kentucky just doesn't seem like a program that's at that space right now. I mean, it's been growing. I mean, but I think a lot of people are fairly confident that Mark Stoops could be the guy that's been growing this program. I mean, we've got we lose Will Levis, one of the best quarterbacks this school has seen in a while. Even if you don't like Will Levis, I mean, you can't overstate how wild it was his first year having a quarterback that could throw almost the length of the field for a touchdown, because that just wasn't Kentucky. And I mean, there were guys who were dogs that played the quarterback position, but they were better off being running backs, wide receivers, anything other than a true quarterback.
Yeah.
But they were forced into that role because they needed a quarterback. Now, so you lose Will Levis, and the question is, okay, well, what do we do now? We lost our great quarterback. Then you got Devin Leary coming in. You lose a program-defining running back like Chris Rodriguez. All right, well, let's bring in 3 more. That's something that Kentucky couldn't do years ago, and now Kentucky is that school that can do that. It's a destination that people expect to be at least stable for a while.
I think Stoops has realized that's how he's going to win, though. He knows that he might not get all the best. I mean, they do get recruits, don't get me wrong, but they're not getting these 5 stars consistently every single year. So he knows the portal's our best friend at Kentucky. We can, with Levis, we showed the blueprint of what we could do with transfer portal players. Again, with Wandale and Levis. So again, I think he found his formula with that.
You could even argue beyond just, about the recruits. I mean, one could argue it's even better to go for a guy who's established himself in the portal than a guy who's a massive question mark in recruiting. I mean, not that teams are ever going to stop going after 5-star recruits, but how many 5-star recruits do you hear about that are just absolute busts? In the same regard as NFL draft picks. I mean, if you're an NFL team and you've got a wide receiver who's succeeded in the NFL, maybe he's asking a little bit more money versus a guy who could be good or could just be absolutely terrible. So, I mean, there's something to be said about, bringing in someone who maybe is a little bit older, maybe is a little bit more experienced, but has established that he can do it at this level and can fit into a system versus someone who you don't know anything about, really.
And go to NFL after it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's talk about the NFL. Who do you all think has a chance of going to the NFL after this season?
A few guys, actually.
Yeah, everybody give me just one guy and your explanation.
Personally, I am very surprised J.J. Weaver is still a college football player.
Yeah.
I was going to say J.J. Weaver as well. I think that we always talk about big offensive stars and all that, but when you look at the guys who have been going to the NFL, I mean, last year you had Carrington Valentine, and that's one that I was even surprised when he declared. But, I think a lot of the guys that you see actually get drafted are the guys who aren't those superstars. They're like defensive guys who fit that system, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, guys that are the unsung heroes of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, I really have to think about how this season's going to go, but I feel like Ray Davis could be a contender.
I'd be 100%.
If it goes well. And then, I mean, obviously Leary if things go great for him.
Ray's going to be a solid 4th-round pick for some team that he's going to be a backup running back, and he's going to be in the league for a while. But also, again, I'm just going to say, I think you need to watch out for Zion Childress in the secondary again with J. Love. I think them two guys also have a future.
I also think it's important, too, like you touched on there a little bit with Ray Davis, could be a 4th-round pick. I mean, you had a guy years ago in Benny Snell who got drafted, and maybe he didn't make it in the NFL as a running back, but he kind of found himself as a special teams role. So I think a lot of the guys you need to look at that could really have a future in the NFL, maybe not a guy who's the best at his position, but a guy who can fit places. I mean, Benny Snell solidified himself as a special teams guy in the NFL after, he wanted to be a running back, but that's not what the Steelers needed from him. And he filled his role, and he succeeded in doing that. If you want some more names I think could go, I don't think it'll be this year because they're so young, but I think in a few years' time, both Berryon and Dane could be big-time draft picks.
Oh, yeah.
I think in my head I was putting those a little bit lower again because we talking about what to be excited about. I think them two guys, they're a year older now. I think they're going to watch out for them also.
I mean, I think their year is going to be next year. I mean, I see them just, loving Kentucky and loving being here, and I agree. I think they could go real big time in a couple years.
I mean, he was a transfer guy, even though he started off as a Mr. Kentucky football before going to Nebraska. But I think that you look at Berryon and Dane, I mean, especially Dane Key in his hands. I mean, these are guys that if they stick around for a few years, they could be a Wan'Dale Robinson level of like hype around him, like a guy that teams are like putting on their board and circling with a red pen, saying we got to get this guy.
I think you
counting
have
down
to
the days until they can get them. Yeah,
both Key and Brown. I think you already see guys doing that already.
Well, Berryon's speed is just unbelievable.
Deadly.
Unbelievable.
Cannot
speed.
stop it.
I mean, I'm sure some people got tired of it being on Highlight Haven, but last year's kick return he had in the first game, I mean, that boy got up to like 22 miles an hour, was it? Like, that's ridiculous.
I mean, the first ever college game of his career. Like, that's
his first kick return of his college career.
Like, who does that?
Berryon Brown does.
No one except him. Like, it's crazy. So if he can do that on the first game of his college career, I mean, imagine what he can do his second year.
I mean, you can make a point. There was times last year that maybe Berryon had some drops that were frustrating, but this he's coming back to college. He's more experienced. He was a freshman last year, a true freshman. You can teach someone to catch the ball a little bit better. You can't teach someone to run 20-plus miles an hour. That's a skill you got to have.
And that's what NFL front offices are looking for. They're looking for athletic bodies who do stuff that you can't teach because, they have the top of the top coaches.
On the opposite end of that spectrum, though, you have Dan. I mean, maybe he's not as fast. He's still fast. But it's not as easy to teach a guy the way to catch a ball the way he does. I mean, I know I just said you can teach Berryon to catch a little bit better, sure, but that man Dane, there was times last year where once his hands were on that ball, it was like it was glued to his hand.
Yeah,
like
catching
it
in between traffic, in between two people, that's a crazy talent that definitely deserves to be looked at too.
Absolutely.
I think one name, he's in the same class, so again, he's not going to be going this next year, but I think it's amazing we haven't even talked about Dion this entire time.
Yeah, very true. I just think it's special that, a lot of people don't put enough value in how much a good wide receiver or even running back who can catch the ball. You can have great quarterbacks, certainly, and I think Ali will agree with me on Levis in this regard too, but a good wide receiver can make an okay quarterback look great.
Yeah.
And I think a great quarterback can still struggle to make a okay wide receiver look super good. I mean, you can have good throws that get dropped, but the ability for these wide receivers to go get the ball, even if it's not on their route, even if it's poorly thrown, can't be overstated how important that is for the game. I mean, there was times where you look at a guy like Wandale, he was hyped up for a reason, not just because he had great highlights, because Wandale was a guy who, if Will Levis got into trouble and just needed to chuck that ball down the field, Wandale was going to go get it. It didn't matter where it was. He was going to be there, and he was going to come down with it.
Yeah, there was games where he had probably like 70% of the target share, like insane, absolutely insane numbers for sure.
Absolutely. I think that Will Levis really, really benefited from Wandale. And I think that Devin Leary, even though I think he's better than Levis, or could be better than Levis, he will really, really benefit from having Barryon Brown and having Dane Key. I mean, Barryon Brown's a guy who could turn a 5-yard catch into a 15-yard catch because he covers that 10 yards so fast.
Yeah.
You know, they don't even have a chance to touch him.
And also, another target he has is his name, Joshua Caddis, is it? The tight end?
That sounds right, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
he's also a name you need to watch out to.
Yeah.
He's a young guy, and he had a big game against Georgia, too. So
Yeah.
I think he's also a name that
I think
BBN needs
Our
to look
tight
at.
ends and games they've shown out for sure, but I know that they've been plagued by injuries a lot, but it's been a very athletic room over the years, and hopefully we can see that shape out this year.
Well, that's something I wanted to touch on, too. You know, I don't have a ton of names that just spring to mind as, like, all-star guys, but I think Kentucky's been kind of undervalued as a tight end school. Like it's not like a school that relies on tight ends the way you see like maybe George Kittle be relied on in the NFL or Travis Kelce be relied on in the NFL. But Kentucky is one that in recent years has had like these great wide receiver names, but you throw to those wide receivers 3 or 4 times, and then it's a 4th down play, it goes to a tight end. And
Yeah.
it goes to a tight end who maybe you haven't even heard of as a fan, but he makes a catch and he makes a play. And, you know, some of that's because Kentucky usually has so many tight ends that they can kind of be malleable to fit that role. But Kentucky, I think, definitely needs to be seen better for how good it uses its tight ends.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's really the end of my questions for you guys. Is there any other topic that you think that I missed that you guys really want to talk about?
I think
So.
the defense, I just think something about this defense this year. I think this defense is going to carry this team to a lot of these wins. I think, again, all the talk is about these offensive transfers, but just how every UK game the last few years, I think if you really watch the games, you're going to see that defense is the reason why they win games. I think that's going to be no different this year.